Hello students, what we're going to be talking about in this movie is the most important amendment to the Constitution, which is the First Amendment, which contains what we call the Five Freedoms. Now keep in mind that when the constitutional delegates were creating the Constitution, they felt that securing personal liberties was one of the most important things that the Constitution must establish. In fact, many anti-federalists wouldn't even approve of a constitution without adding the Bill of Rights. And topping the Bill of Rights is the First Amendment, which actually contains five separate freedoms, which we're going to talk about a little more in depth in this presentation. What we see here are the five parts of the First Amendment: speech, press, religion, assembly, and petition. Each of those is kind of self-explanatory. The box in the corner contains a sixth portion of the amendment known as the freedom of expression. Freedom of expression is not formally listed in the Constitution, but by many it has been implied to be part of it as a sort of mishmash of the other rights thrown together. Basically, what they say is that the First Amendment protects our right to express ourselves in a variety of ways. While we may have the freedom to express ourselves, what we must always remember is that no freedom is absolute. The key to this amendment and what is not actually protected by our freedom of expression is that essentially you are free to express yourself until your rights start to infringe upon others. And the catch-all that we have starred in the corner is that your speech, assembly, petition, any part of the First Amendment cannot incite lawless action, which basically says that when you're expressing yourselves, you can't be expressing yourselves in some sort of criminal way that will violate the rights of other people. We'll explain a couple of examples of these in a moment. A few examples of this inciting lawless action would be, for instance, you have the freedom to assemble, which means form in groups of like-minded people to express your ideas, but you wouldn't have the freedom to assemble in the middle of Interstate 55, for example. Obviously it caused a traffic hazard and a safety concern and that sort of thing, and since your action of assembling would be breaking some other sort of law, that would not be protected by your freedom of speech. Likewise, you have the freedom to sign up petitions, pass around to your friends to do things like, get better food in the school cafeteria. That's all protected. But if your petition were to promote some sort of illegal activity, like if you were to sign a petition saying that the president should be assassinated, for example, that would not be protected by your freedom of petition. Although that seems like a ridiculous example, there was an incident a year or so ago where there was a Facebook page, basically the survey saying, click yes if you feel that President Obama should be assassinated. And the students who made that Facebook page got into a great heap of trouble with the Secret Service, and they were not protected by the First Amendment in that particular case. This idea of not inciting lawless action also applies to your freedom of speech, where crimes and criminal speech is not protected. You don't have the freedom, for example, to plan a crime, like a bank robbery is not protected by your freedom of speech. Also, you cannot make threats to people, like, I'm going to kill you, that sort of thing is not protected by speech. Likewise, egging someone onto some sort of confrontation is known as fighting words, and on several cases the Supreme Court has ruled that that is not protected by the freedom of speech. So trying to cause other people to commit criminal acts against you is also not protected, I should say, by your freedom of speech. Also, there is a clause about what's not protected in your freedom of speech known as the clear and present danger clause. This basically says if you're trying to be a jokester and you say something that could cause harm to other people, that's not protected. The classic example is someone shouting fire in a crowded theater. This would cause chaos and panic and that sort of thing in the theater, so that's not protected. Likewise, if you were to yell bomb on an airplane, obviously that would cause problems and is not allowed due to the clear and present danger clause within the First Amendment.
Some German humour's been lost on airport officials in Perth. Two visitors heading for Sydney put an esky bag with the word bomb written on its lid in the terminal. Their prank led to 1,000 people being evacuated from the building for an hour. Police didn't see the joke.
Are you happy you're not going to jail today?
The Germans have been fined $1,500 each and will fly home this weekend.
This idea of inciting lawless action can also apply to every other part of the First Amendment. For instance, freedom of religion. If your religion involves human sacrifice, obviously that incites lawless action. That would not be protected. Also, an interesting thing is that lying is not protected within your freedom of expression. For instance, if you were to go home and say, I didn't do my homework, so Mr. Bear smacked me. Okay, well, that's not protected by your freedom of speech because it's known as slander. Because it's not a true incident and you're spreading harmful lies about me, that's not protected. Likewise, if you were to go and, tell this to a reporter and say the Coal City Courant was to print a story saying Mr. Bear smacked his students, this would not be protected by their freedom of press. It's actually a violation known as libel. So lies in either spoken form or printed word are also not protected by your First Amendment rights. However, it should be noted that newspapers and television shows publish things all the time before they know that it's actually true. And the way they get around a libel lawsuit is by saying the words allegedly. So in that sort of case where a student said that I smacked them, the Coal City Courant could protect themselves by saying, allegedly, this teacher smacked a student, which would protect them from a lawsuit and libel laws. We've talked a lot about things that the First Amendment would not protect, especially these things that incite lawless action. But let's move in and talk about some things your First Amendment does protect that you might not actually think that it would. The first being symbolic speech. The idea of freedom of speech, you think of spoken word, but over time there have been a number of symbols and actions which have communicated an idea but really aren't spoken aloud. And it has been decided on countless times that this is part of freedom of speech. For example, back during the Vietnam War, there were a number of students who wanted to protest Vietnam by wearing these black armbands, and they wore these black armbands to school. The principal felt that they were inappropriate and told them that they were suspended until they took the armbands off. And the kids fought him, saying that, they have the right to freedom of speech. And this case made it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court agreed with the students that, yes, indeed, this is freedom of speech. And furthermore, that students do have freedom of speech within the classroom as long as they're not causing some sort of disruption in the school. So this was the Tinker case, which we will talk about more when we get into the Supreme Court. Now, one symbol that you may think would not be protected is flag burning. And for a while, in several states, there were laws that were made the activity of burning the flag in some sort of protest a crime. But in the case of Texas versus Johnson, this was fought because they said, what's the difference to burning this object or wearing a black armband? It's all just symbolic speech. If you want to protest the United States, you should be able to do so in whatever manner. And the Supreme Court agreed with that mentality. So the idea of burning the flag is actually not a crime due to your freedom of speech rights.